Welcome to EPG Patishala. My name is Dugirala Vasanta. I am in the teaching faculty of the Department of Linguistics at Osmania University, Hyderabad. My lecture relates to course number 10, Psychoneurolinguistics, module 19 on representation versus processing. The objective of this lecture is to talk about the question of linguistic representations and the brain's role in processing language using those representations. What I'll try to do in today's lecture is to explain what are linguistic representations and how they're stored in the brain and how they're retrieved during language processing. The classical model of brain-language relationships, about which you would have picked up a little bit from the previous two, three modules, is that Broca's area is in charge of production, Wernicke's area is in charge of comprehension, and that there is a connection between Broca's and Wernicke's area through arcuate fasciculus. They are sharing information with each other, and that's how we speak and understand language. That Wernicke's area basically interprets the meaning, whereas Broca's area sends signals to motor cortex telling our speech muscles to move. So these are the major, this is the localizationist approach and classical model which survived for more than a century says that this is how language is processed, and that there are certain structures in the parietal lobe and occipital lobe which are involved in reading and writing. But basically left hemisphere plays a major role in majority of the people in any culture. Okay, this is the classical model. See this picture, typical picture of a classical model on the screen. You see in the frontal lobe, the light blue area is the Broca's area. In the temporal lobe, that brownish area is the Wernicke's area. They are connected with band of fibers called arcuate fasciculus, indicated here with yellow lines. So this is the model of classical model. Now, say in the past 3 to 4 decades, the classical model has been challenged. Although it survived for more than a century, new challenges have come up in neurolinguistics. The new questions that neurolinguistics is asking is, why do you have to accept that left hemisphere is dominant in majority of the people, that only Broca's area is responsible for production and Wernicke's area is responsible for comprehension? Is it possible that there are some levels of language processing that bias more activation or more participation from the left hemisphere? Is it possible that when you are involved in deep semantic level analysis or syntactic level analysis, left hemisphere plays a role, but not otherwise? And the second question is, are there some type of representations that call for balanced participation of right and left? Please remember, these questions were not asked earlier. Earlier, which area is responsible for production? Which area is responsible for comprehension? Which area is responsible for reading and writing? Those questions are very different from these two questions. These two questions are saying, is it one level of processing which makes left hemisphere play major role? Is it a particular type of representation which calls for interaction or participation of both the hemispheres? So these are new questions. Let's look closely at what linguistic representations are, and look at the, let's examine this in relation to English word carrot. Carrot, let's see how many phonemes are there. You have k, a, r, a, t, 5. How many syllables are there? 2. And where is the stress falling on the first syllable? And how it is, it's a noun. So it's an open class word, right? And it can be pluralized, carrots, and it's associated with action verbs like cut, slice, and things like that. So these are different examples of linguistic representations. So if these are representation, then what is processing? Because this whole module is about representation versus processing. So what is processing? The classical model thought, according to classical model, these representations are stored in different parts of the brain. Um, but processing refers to algorithmic operations that are independent of the nature of the modality of the stimulus. So, you may have seen a carrot or you have heard the word carrot. Irrespective of whether you have seen or heard, there are some operations going on in our brain. There is something happening, some algorithmic operations, computation going on in our brain. So, processes are representations that remain activated over a period of time. So, instead of saying focusing on phonemes, syllables which are static, processing is saying what happens to these phonemes or syllables over a period of time. So, I repeat, processes are representations that remain activated over a period of time. But in most courses in linguistics that you may have taken so far, you would have learnt a lot about linguistic representations but not about processing. It's only in neurolinguistics you are going to learn about processing. So, but let's recall what we know about representations. We know that most adults have a lexicon of at least 50,000 words. English, whatever language you are speaking about, each mental lexicon will have at least 50,000 words. And these words can be classified into open class, which are nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, versus closed class, which are pronouns, articles, prepositions, conjunctions. Nouns have strong visual associations because noun usually depicts an object. An object has a size and shape and color. Verbs have strong association with actions. We know that these. We also know that nouns are of different kinds. Some nouns represent living things. Some represent non-living artifacts. Some are common nouns, some are proper nouns, some are concrete nouns, some are abstract nouns, some are simple nouns, some are compound nouns. You have learnt all this in linguistics. And we store all these words in different semantic fields. We know several fruits, we know many vegetables, we know names of vehicles, we know names of furniture. These are semantic fields. Within each field you have individual lexemes belonging to that field. There are superordinate terms. You know dog is a superordinate, poodle is a variety of dog and therefore it is subordinate. We know that also. So, this is all about information about representations. But what are the corresponding, are there any processing units? In neurobiological units which are involved in computation in the brain are dendrites, neurons, synapses, cell assemblies. But these units have they are incommensurable with phonemes, syllables, morphemes, alright. So, there is this incompatibility between linguistic units of representation and neurobiological units which are involved in computation over those representations. So, the question then is, what representations are recruited and how are they recruited by brain during processing, that is during understanding language? How is brain recruiting these representations and how are they combined online when we are understanding something? Let us look at the neural representation of words as shown in the pictures on the screen. Notice the cortical networks corresponding to nouns is very flat compared to the cortical network corresponding to verbs. Why is that? It's because verbs encode actions and actions activate motor cortex. So, the cortical network for verbs is going up a little bit. It's a little more vertical than that for nouns. So, these are the cortical networks for nouns and verbs on the screen. Study this picture carefully. So, you again and again please look at the previous picture. The cortical networks are activated when we process nouns are very different from the cortical networks which get activated in the brain when we process verbs. Alright. So there is a very interesting work done by Muller in the late 1990s. The reference is cited in the e-text. Please go back and read his original article to learn more about these cortical networks which correspond to nouns versus verbs. Not only nouns and verbs have different cortical networks in the brain, but if you take action verbs like say kick, pick, lick. Now stop and think about it. What is involved in kick? Leg is involved. What is involved in pick? Arm is involved. What is involved in lick? Tongue in the mouth area is involved. And you know brain has a representation of the entire body. Now you look at the cortical maps given by Muller for leg related words. The cortical map is like this. Arm related verbs, it's a little flat. Face related, even flat. So the cortical networks for kick, pick and lick are different is what Muller argues. It's a very interesting idea and you should read more about this by taking the additional readings mentioned in the e-text. But what we are talking here is about word webs. So in other words, there are existence of meaning related processing differences between word categories. You have different types of words, they carry different meanings and the cortical networks are different. Now selective loss of nouns or verbs after brain damage, we can easily find out whether, now if you say verbs involve motor cortex in the frontal lobe, we can go and study when motor cortex is damaged in a brain damaged patient, are the verbs lost independently of nouns? Are there more selective damage to verbs much more than nouns? That is what neurolinguists do. The cortical distribution of nouns and verbs also depend, of course we don't talk in nouns or verbs in isolation. So we have to engage with noun phrase or verb phrase. We talk in sentences and much larger units. So interestingly, neurolinguistic research in recent times have shown that the cortical distribution of nouns and verbs differ depending upon the grammatical markers attached to them when they appear in noun phrase or a verb phrase. In other words, processing of a representation over time. What happens? Because it is different to say pen or whether you are saying the pen or a pen, that whether you are using a noun phrase or an individual noun, the processing is different because one takes a little longer than the other one. So in other words, we have to also look at the time scale analysis in the brain, not just where are nouns, where are verbs, which area processes verbs, which area processes nouns. These questions talk about spatial information, but we need to look at temporal information. So see the picture on the screen. This is a picture of temporal activation patterns when you are asked to name a picture. You are shown a picture, you are trying to name what happens in your brain is what is showed. Let me summarize the activities. You look at the picture later, listen to the patterns. 0 to 175 milliseconds, you grasp the visual features of the object. You are looking at a picture, you grasp the visual features from 0 to 175 milliseconds. 150 to 225 milliseconds, you get to the meaning. It's called lemma activation. 200 to 400 milliseconds, you get to the phonological code, actual syllables and sounds and all that. The word is activated. 275 to 400 milliseconds, you monitor it, your own speech and correct. Sometimes there is a slip of the tongue and you can correct it, monitoring. 400 to 600 milliseconds, actual syllabification, and finally articulation. So notice that in this time scale there is an overlap, not only in time overlap, but cortical areas are overlapping. If you go back and look at the picture and read this slide, you will see there is an overlap of cortical areas. Now let's go back to the old idea of left hemisphere being a dominant hemisphere for all language processes, because it's only left hemisphere which has Broca's area and Wernicke's area. This is the idea called classical model, I mean idea proposed by classical model, which was upheld for over a century. But the debate about representation and processing we are discussing in this module questions the classical idea's assumption by stating that perhaps left hemisphere is involved in a specific kind of processing. So, we need to look at more details about type of processing in which left hemisphere is dominant and type of processing in which right and left participate. So, so for instance, it is possible that left hemisphere takes an active role in stimulus driven bottom up processing, that is rapidly changing acoustic signals involving sub-lexical units like phonemes and syllables. So, when you are listening to individual phonemes or syllables of a word and you are trying to monitor a phoneme, that is bottom up processing, it is possible that left hemisphere takes greater role. And also in automatic processing of spatial and motor aspects of speech, as is the case with generation of verbs when you are shown nouns. So, left hemisphere also makes use of dorsal wear pathways, as opposed to what we are saying about left hemisphere participating in this kind of processing. It is possible that both right and left hemispheres participate when top down processing takes place. That is, you draw on your world information, the information you know about the world, which is stored in your long term memory. So, it is a memory driven processing. So, when you are engaged in memory driven processing, both hemispheres participate. And also control processing of abstract words and extraction. When you are involved in going beyond sentences, you have to extract coherence or processing of prosody, right hemisphere also comes into play. So, both right and left hemispheres they make use of ventral pathway. Read in the e-text about the dual root model to understand about ventral pathway and the dorsal pathway. So, left hemisphere does get recruited quite a bit in particular when we process particular way, information is processed from bottom up, alright. On the other hand, both right and left hemispheres get involved when there is top down information. What is top down memory driven information? We acquired that information from world knowledge, alright. You do not have to see whether it is C is curve is like this or not. You will see next to it, suppose there is a and there is a T. Even if you can't see, you will say it is cat. So, you have a knowledge about how to predict. So, top down memory driven information, both hemispheres are involved. Meaningful object names and lexical semantic processing, both hemispheres are involved. Control processing of abstract words, both hemispheres are involved. Ventral pathway is recruited, ventral pathway recruits both hemispheres, alright. So, what is the implication of saying both left hemisphere and right hemisphere is involved in language processing? It is not true that only left hemisphere is dominant. Why do we need to engage with this new information? So, what we are, the new insights are telling us same linguistic information. You might be talking about syllables or phonemes or words, or stressed words or closed class words. Same representations are realized differently, distributed and interconnected. They are managed by interconnected cortical and subcortical networks in the brain. They are not fixed in one part of the brain. There is no one area which is holding on to linguistic symbols like that. Then one of the major insights of this new understanding is a new model called dual stream model of brain language relations. In this dorsal stream, there are two streams, dorsal stream and ventral stream. Dorsal stream maps sound to articulation and therefore it involves premotor cortex and superior parieto-temporal regions. So, mapping sound to articulation, and ventral stream maps sound to meaning, and since meaning is involved in meaning involves temporal lobe. Okay. So, ventral stream is more into temporal lobe, dorsal stream is more into premotor cortex and things like that. Look at the figure on the screen in detail. You have to spend several minutes maybe looking at all the boxes and the arrows, and the right hemisphere on the right side, left hemisphere on the left, and the pink areas are basically you can see in both hemispheres. In other words, lexical semantic processing involves both the hemispheres. Speech perception in yellow area involves both hemispheres, but it is only the blue areas which is more in terms of sensory motor interface, more frontal networks in the left hemisphere. In other words, remember the two questions we raised earlier, it looks like the kind of processing that you are involved in recruits different areas of the brain. It's not it's not about left hemisphere being dominant. So what is dual stream model actually saying? It's saying speech is first processed by both hemispheres, then there is a ventral stream going from superior temporal gyrus to inferior posterior temporal cortex is involved in mapping speech to meaning representations, and then there is a dorsal stream responsible for integrating auditory and motor aspects of speech, sensory, motor, auditory. Sensory is in this case auditory because we are talking about spoken language. So, this dorsal, the dual stream model is supported by a whole lot of neuroimaging and electrophysiological studies, also lesion studies. There is now people are paying more attention to the so-called minor or the right hemisphere. In the classical model, they ignored, they said right hemisphere doesn't play much role in language. Now they are looking more closely at right hemisphere. According to dual stream model, right hemisphere is not minor anymore. It does play an important role in language processing. It is seen as a resource reserve, slightly coarse-grained and less efficient maybe compared to left hemisphere, but it does get engaged when there is lot of processing demands, that is a particular task demands lot of processing, then you have to recruit right hemisphere. You can't manage only with left hemisphere. So, to summarize today's lecture, I've talked about linguistic representations, the symbolic representations relating to phonemes, syllables, words, and how the cortical networks in relation to such representations, like take different type of nouns or different type of verbs, how the cortical networks are different for these representations. And we've also looked at the neuron, the synapse, the cell assemblies corresponding to these representations. But more recently in neurolinguistics, because of availability of neuroimaging and electrophysiological measures, there is more focus on processing rather than static representations. So, I have explained, I've talked about the problems with the classical model of brain-language relations, which is based on localizationist approach in recent times because of neuroimaging and electrophysiological techniques, and also a lot of cross-linguistic studies. Currently, there is new models have been developed. I have described one model called dual root model, which says that language processing and production involves both right hemisphere processes as well as left hemisphere processes. For further details, please consult the e-text. Thank you.